Hey everyone, I got some feedback saying people want to know more about how to incorporate outside sources. So I've got a couple of quick videos for you. The first one is called Avoiding Drop Quotations. And basically, that's because when we first learn how to use quotations from outside sources, we have a tendency to just kind of like drop them right in there, just like slam, and without a whole lot of smoothness or flow. Um, and this is to help you get that smoothness and that flow back. And it's something that's part of the professional dialect and the academic dialect. So it's not really going away. If you just got some quotations or outside sources in your work already and they don't feel smooth, it's a placeholder. But this will help you figure out how to put it in a way that makes sense and keeps that flow going. So, a couple of quick rules up front. Now, when you've got information from outside sources, if it's either directly quoted or paraphrased, they should be introduced with a signal phrase. Now, this is especially true in, academic writing. It's almost never wrong to do this. So you're basically providing context for it. So in other words, let me give you an example. According to Harvard political scientist Robert Putnam. Now, there are three parts to a signal phrase. It's not in the slide. I'm just going to tell them to you right now. The three elements are the author or speaker's name, the claim they have to authority, finally, some version of says or writes or thinks. Those three things. And if you notice in this one, we've got all three. We've got a name, Robert Putnam. Claim to authority. Why should we believe this person? They're a political scientist who works at Harvard. Okay, so they might know a few things. And according to is kind of a fancy pants version of says or writes or thinks. I'm going to put up a few more here. As former Secretary of Labor Robert Reich states, okay, do we have a name? Yeah, that's the easy one. Do we have a claim to authority? Former Secretary of Labor. Yeah, if you're writing about, the workplace or professions or minimum wage or something like that, that's going to make a lot of sense. Do we have a version of says, thinks, or writes? Bingo, right here. I've got two more here. You can go ahead and pause right here and see if you can identify those three elements. If you're not taking notes, I suggest you take some quick notes on this because remember that act of writing, using pen or pencil and paper really helps burn it into your memory. Just typing away, it's not the same process. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So go ahead and pause right now if you want to. And I'll pause too. Okay, that was me pretending to pause. Let's move on to the next slide. So if you're getting sick and tired of using says or writes or thinks, here on this slide you'll notice some nice synonyms. Argues, contends, points out, notices, notes, observes, da-da-da-da-da. They've got different shades of meaning, so, one might be better than the other. But remember, this is totally a paint job issue. When you're just building the rough draft and putting your sources in, it's just all about making sure you don't forget them. Go ahead and pause it if you want. You write these down if you like. So, here's the incorrect way of doing it. Suppose you're writing about, like hyper-consumerism in the United States, in other words, how much people in the United States spend on consumer items, what's the phrase I'm looking for? Shopaholism is sometimes used. Retail therapy, compulsive shopping, all those things are getting at the same idea, that it's this thing that goes way on too much. And suppose you find this quote and you want to put it in. Here's the incorrect way of sliding it in. Americans suffer from wanting too many non-essential consumer items. I think we can all kind of, relate to that at some level. Quote, greed has infected our society. It is the worst infection. And then you've got last name, page number, parentheses. Now notice this is an example of a dropped quotation. That's why it's incorrect. You've got your own words here at the top, Americans suffer, all the way down to consumer items. And then you're like, oh, here's this great quote. Let me go ahead and throw it in. But notice how they put it in. They just, bam, they dropped it right in. It feels really abrupt. And kind of like, okay, where's this coming from? Who's this Benjamin person? Is it Benjamin Button? That Brad Pitt movie where he starts as an old man and he ages into a baby. If you haven't seen that movie, don't. It's not very good. Now, here's the correct way to avoid it. I want you to listen to and read the flow going on here. Americans suffer from wanting too many non-essential consumer items. United States Surgeon General Regina Benjamin notes, greed has infected our society. It is the worst infection. All right. Notice that yellow text is that signal phrase. You've got a name, Regina Benjamin. You've got a claim to authority, the United States Surgeon General. That's the highest medical official in the executive part of the government. Works right under the president. And finally, a version of says, writes, or thinks. Notes. Boom. You got all that in there. It's got a nice flow to it. Now, I know some of you are going to notice, whoa, Benjamin's here and it's also here. Do you have to put it in twice? You don't. If you've got their name in the actual signal phrase, all you need is the page number, if it's available, in parentheses at the end. We call this the parentheses citation or the parenthetical citation. But you know what? I'm not going to go nuts if you've got the name in the signal phrase and also the name in the parentheses citation, because my philosophy is basically that, I'd rather have you do a little bit too much than not enough. If I tell you to do it twice, most of you will do it twice. Some of you will slip up, only do it once. If that's the case, then if I tell you only to do it once, most of you will do it once, but every now and then some people are going to slip up and not do it at all. So I'd rather have you be more careful at this stage. And here, I've listed a whole bunch of different sources, their claims to authority, and a quotation. Now, if you want to practice this on your own, go ahead and pause this page right here, and you can build a nice, clean, fluid signal phrase for each one of these. If you practice it a little bit, it's going to get easier and easier. And of course, if you've got any questions on this, feel free to text me or email me, and we can address whatever problems you have. I believe that's the last slide. Oh, there's more on this page too, if you want to practice it. Maybe I'll hit you guys in class with this. That would be fun. Hard transition into the next part of this, but it's also really helpful. We talked a little bit about drop quotations. Now remember, a direct quotation is only one of two ways, or three rather, that you can actually incorporate work. On one side is summarizing and paraphrasing, and they're fairly similar to each other. On that other side is direct quotation, which we talked about in the avoiding drop quotation slides earlier. Now, what's the difference? Summarizing is when you take a big fat text and you condense it down into your own words. Like you take a whole page and you bring it down to a paragraph, or a whole book down to a paragraph. Or, you take a whole paragraph and you get it down to a sentence or a phrase. Paraphrasing, on the other hand, is like a full-length version of that original text you're looking at in your own words. So if something's about a paragraph long, the paraphrase is about a full paragraph long. If it's 5 sentences long, it's roughly 5 sentences long in the paraphrase. How do I remember them? With paraphrasing, you're pairing up the original to a new one, phrase by phrase. You pair by phrase. Yeah, that's the best I got. Finally, direct quotation, which we talked about earlier. It's an exact version of the language of the original text inside quotation marks. Now, when you summarize and paraphrase, here's some hints for you. You can use synonyms, other words that mean the same thing, vary your sentence structure, switch the order of ideas as long as it still makes sense, make short sentences out of long sentences, make long sentences out of short sentences. All of this creates variety and makes it look like something that has most of the flow of the original. Now, when should you use summarizing and paraphrasing, and when should you use direct quotation? I'm glad you asked. Let me tell you. We've got two sides here, summarizing and paraphrasing on one, direct quotation on the other. Summarizing and paraphrasing is best used when the original language is transparent. It's scientific data, it's research, it's statistics, it's numbers. There's nothing special or magical or brilliant about the language. It's just trying to be clear as possible with no frills. Super efficient. And you should use a signal phrase in front of it too. Once again, even though it's in your own words, it's somebody else's ideas, signal who it's coming from. And we talked about that. The DMV found that. You know, it's not required, but I think it's worth putting in. We can talk about more subtleties later, but I always err on the side of caution on that. And it definitely does require that parenthetical citation. Last name and a page number of parentheses right after the information. Now, in the direct quotation, this is something you should use when there's something really amazing about that original language. It's not just trying to be transparent or clear. There's something beautiful or hilarious or powerful, moving about it. It's phrased in such a way that there's something essential or really important or really memorable that you would lose if you got rid of it. It definitely requires a single phrase when you use that direct quotation. Don't just drop it in. Don't do a drop quotation. Finally, it does require that parenthetical citation at the end. Parentheses, last name, just the number of the page, parentheses, and then period on the outside. Let's have some examples here. Here's a great source to paraphrase or summarize. Here's the exact words from DMV report. 30% of all teen collisions involve texting. There's nothing amazing about that language. It's very clear, which is awesome, but it's not blowing your mind. It's like, okay, that fact I need to know. It's an important fact, but the language is not doing anything out of the ordinary. In the research essay, look how I reworded it. The DMV has found that 3 out of 10 adolescent crashes were caused at least in part by texting. Notice I took 30% and turned it into 3 out of 10. Same thing. Teenage turned to adolescent, collisions turned into crashes. By texting, you could also put in SMS or something like that. The more you practice, the easier it gets. Now let's look at the other side. Here's the exact words from the source for direct quotation. Secretary of Transportation Ray LaHood. Texting is America's #1 teen killer on the road. That's kind of a poetic, powerful sentence if you think about it. Texting is the #1 teen killer. If you just put it in there, the #1 cause of death in the United States for adolescents is texting. Yes, you're getting across that same message, but there's something really powerful and compelling about that particular wording, so I would keep it. For use in the research essay, notice I did put the quotation marks on it right there. And at the end, you should have after it, and it looks like I forgot it, parentheses, LaHood. Let's just say it's page 68, so it would just be the number 68, parentheses, period. And that's the end of that particular show. I'll go back to something a little brighter. Again, if you've got any questions about anything regarding when to paraphrase and summarize and when to use direct quotation, hit me up. I'll be happy to talk with you about it more. Remember, this is a paint job issue, but I know some people want to kind of get rolling on it a little bit earlier. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.